Welcome to the episode.
Welcome, Episode 3. Look at us
What?
sticking it out. Look at us.
Look at our consistency.
I know, right?
We are committed.
We are so committed.
What made you want this topic today?
I'm trying to think what inspired it, actually. It just came up this morning. I guess I was thinking about what is possible in terms of change and what we need to accept. Just the question itself was kind of bouncing around in my head. I'm not sure what the trigger was. I'd love to
Okay.
have a great anecdote. Yeah, you're waiting for that to
It
boom us
was,
into
it
the
was.
episode, but I don't think it did come off the back of an anecdote. I think this is just how I spend my Thursday mornings
Okay.
thinking about stuff.
It was, it's apropos. I think this is something I personally have been grappling with a lot.
I think this is a big question. I feel like a whole podcast could just be this question. When I say whole podcast, I mean
Yeah. Every
series of
episode.
episodes. Yeah, exactly. Before we
Isn't
continue,
that what it is anyway?
yes. So I feel like we're going to be the ones to figure out the answer to this question as
We
well.
are. We are. I think I figured it out. I've spent about a week or two figuring it out. No,
Well,
I'm just kidding. It's been a long time and I
it,
haven't figured it out.
it could be helpful to think of the ways that we have actually really changed. How different are you now to when you were 20?
In some ways, immensely, and in some ways, not at all. I also think I'm somebody who's not just one thing, and none of us are, obviously, but I've had really discrepant personalities. Like I am one way, and then I'm like almost the opposite way too. So I think of myself as different from when I was 20 in that I think I have flipped the mic. I think certain parts of me have the mic now that never did
Hmm.
before, and vice versa. And like the other parts that did have the mic then don't anymore. But I still feel like the parts of me that have been in my youth are still here. It's just that they're channeled differently.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you know anybody who has had like a massive overhaul change, almost in fundamentally who they are? There's this whole, just an idea really of personal development, personal growth, any kind of overhauling health
Yeah.
plan, diets, all of that kind of thing is all about overhauling everything about how you think, feel, behave in a very short space of time. Do you know anyone who's changed very quickly for any reason?
I feel like we have.
Well, we've changed
like I,
quickly.
I feel like anyone who's gone through like a recovery of some sort. I'm trying to think if I can think of someone in my personal life who's radically shifted.
I've got one, and I'd be interested, I guess, whether
Mm.
you relate to any of this stuff being a mother. So, as a teenager, I had a very close friend, and she was, I hate the word lazy. I tend not to use it, but that is the word that we all would have used for her at that time because she was just somebody who rarely showed up to class. She was just sleeping in. She just didn't want to do anything. And she actually got thrown out of sick form for not attending classes. And then at 19, she became pregnant and she had a kid. And it was like a personality transplant. She suddenly became the kind of person who gardened and baked. And it wasn't just about, how becoming a parent forces you into a certain
Yeah.
kind of responsibility and maturity. She suddenly became this super productive person. Another change she went through as well is a couple of years after having her daughter, she got into a whole load of debt. She was just running stuff up on credit cards, had to amalgamate all her debts. And ever since that day, she learned her lesson and she is so careful and responsible with her money, not in a really fear-based way, just incredibly sensible with her money. She learned her lesson. And then I have a couple of friends who got themselves in that situation a few times and it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
She seems to be one of those people that things happen and she just changes. And interestingly, she's got together with this guy about 5 or 6 years ago, and he's really outdoorsy and all of that. That was not her thing at all. And now she's that.
That's maybe different. Reckonings do this when we've got, I think sometimes hitting rock bottom does that, where drastic life changes, these radical changes in our circumstance can do that. But also she was 19 when you said this happened. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's hard to know what would have evolved anyway. Coming out of adolescence, I think we are exploring who we are and figuring that out. And sometimes I think rebelling. And I've seen people shift from their teenage self to their adult self in ways that uh, I don't know that it would be, I would think about it like as a personality change or some kind of arbitrary shift, but more like an evolution and
Hmm.
more like something that would have been almost like the mirror image sometimes. Sometimes I think we can become the mirror image of a part of ourselves and what we can live in both extremes, in the black and then the white. And other times maybe it doesn't look like that, but I guess my baseline feeling is that like there's not I and totally open, change my mind. Like that's what we're here for. That my baseline feeling is that we don't fundamentally change, but we may change our behaviors and evolve parts.
Yes. Is that not change?
Well, I guess that's like what's the definition of change? Because when
Yeah.
I think my simplistic mind wants to be like, change is like a radical departure of a totally different way of being, which it could be, but it's still born of, I think it feels more hopeful maybe to, it feels so hard to think of changing. And when it feels like evolution, that feels more like a bridge to it that is accessible.
Hmm. Potentially, certainly a lot of people I work with will have a thing in their life that they want to change. I want to change this thing about myself. They're not necessarily coming in, sometimes they might, not necessarily coming in and saying, I want to change everything about me. It's normally focused on certain aspects of themselves that they would want to change. And well, this is often the work is kind of to what extent is change possible?
Yeah.
And to what extent is a sense of self-compassion or even self-management, like managing that part of themselves or ourselves that we don't like or seems to get in our way?
Yeah.
And the two are kind of similar because I've actually found that there are so many things that I have wanted to change about myself over the years. One of them, which is about consistency, because I'd always thought of myself, I am this inconsistent person and I never seem to stick at anything. I was also quite black and white, as you can hear now, as I'm going, I never stuck at anything. And actually, one, I started to stick at a few things, which started to challenge this mindset, this black and white mindset I'd had that I don't. So that was with originally with my yoga, just 2 minutes on
Mm,
the mat every day. It challenged that self belief I had about consistency, but also I accept that I am vulnerable to inconsistency. I'm vulnerable to getting excited about something and then stopping it. And so, actually, in the acceptance of that part of me, it's less pronounced
right. That's
because I'm
the
not in a
irony.
yeah, I'm not in a battle with it. It's a
Right.
paradox, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The resistance makes it
Yes.
grow.
Yes.
I've got a client who, to use the word, bring it back to lazy. She has this word that she calls herself lazy. She procrastinates making dinner. She's always running late to, things, meetings and things she's got appointments for. She's talked about this for a long time and she's like, I don't know. It's just my lazy part. It's just. And recently she came to this, all I can say is almost like this quiet place. She arrived to a session and she said, I think I give myself a really hard time, which was like, and she's known this, but it was like she knew it. And she's like, I can't be doing this. Like, I can't be battling this with myself. And she's like, for the past 2 weeks, I've been showing up to this class she attends on a weekly basis on time. And this is the first, we've been working together for a year. She never is on time. And I was like, what's going on here? And she just had this way of being, she's like, I think that I, number one, resent all the demands of my shoulds, like all of the criticism. She's like, and I just think I'm expecting too much of myself. I think that I expect myself to be some kind of doing it all mom who's like covering all the bases, in my job and in my family life and in taking care of myself. And it's just too much. A person can't do all this in a day. And ever since I had this awareness, I've been showing up to class. She goes, and it's really nice. She's like, I just get there on time and I'm not fighting with myself about it. It's like this idea of this inner resistance that we should be different is the absence of self-compassion. And I also don't think that we can necessarily just be like, okay, I know that I should be not shoulding myself, so therefore I will try to have self-compassion. I think it's when that self-compassion really comes from an organic embodiment. You can't just do that. It's about changing beliefs. And when that happens, I think that's where resistance actually dies or gets quieter. And that's where, yeah, these shifts actually happen. But I don't know that we just can do that and how much control we have over that consciously.
Agreed. And what tends to happen is when there's a part of us that we don't like, we turn it into a battle. I think that the goal is to destroy that part. So in the example you've given, like in a battle with the part of her that's always late. And when you turn it into a battle, that part's going to fight back because it's going to fight for its survival.
Yeah.
So this is where I think the compassion and the acceptance piece comes in. The acceptance doesn't mean, oh, I'm just going to accept that I'm always late and I'm never even going to bother trying to be on time. But it's accepting that that is a challenge, that that is a vulnerability of yours to struggle
Yeah.
with timekeeping, as an example, or whatever it might be for the listener or for us. That for me has been absolutely transformative. It really
Yeah.
has. It
Yeah.
really has. And I think parts work comes into that as well. So the idea of parts work is when there's a part of us that we don't like, we end up rejecting that part. So then that part becomes more walled off. And now we can't communicate with that part. It's just this frustrating,
Yeah.
often experience of self-sabotage, right? That when this part is activated, because it's walled off, it can only be activated almost in isolation when the rest of you can't get a look in. There's no negotiation between the parts when we're rejecting parts of ourselves.
I used to think that parts work, right? That kind of the way through this was to figure out what is that part protecting. So the part that is not wanting to get to class on time, the part that isn't consistent. It's like, oh, okay, we need, and that we're rejecting this part. We need to figure out why that part exists and what it's protecting or what its foundations and roots are. For
Mm-hmm.
example, in the case of this client, the part of her that wanted to be quote unquote lazy, we could surmise, and we've talked about this, that, you know, when she was growing up, her mother was very, very meticulous and orderly and structured and wanted things done a certain way. And this just wasn't in combination with her personality. And there was resentment. There was a lot of resentment. And so there was this part of her that was like, no, I'm not going to get there on time. I'm not going to do the thing I should do. And then she had a should, like, oh, that's bad. So the should develop. So you have the rebel and the critic inside. I used to think that deconstructing that was the answer. And sometimes it is. And I think that sometimes that clarity is really helpful to be like, oh, okay, this part makes sense. And I'm just trying to castrate it. But yeah, I can see how it developed. I can see what it's protecting. But lately, I have been grappling with like, that doesn't always do it because I personally have this part of me that I'm really working with right now that is frustrated at a reality. And I fully know why I am. I know where the part comes from. Yeah, I get it. And it doesn't matter. It's like there is no amount of clarity I can find that is helping it feel any different. Even when I accept it, and even though I do accept it, I am still suffering for it. There is a part of me that, and this is where that question of where are the things that we might not change? And I think this is what I'm running up against. It's like, I don't think I'm going to change this part of me, even when I accept it, even when I drop the resistance. There is pain. And I don't think that just like insight and welcoming parts necessarily changes that. At least I don't think at this moment in time.
Sure. Is it okay to ask a question about that part? We can
Yes.
always cut it if you want to. What does that part need in order to let go? So, not what does that part need, what's the need it's trying to get met, but what does it need in order to let go?
This is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. An actual change in the fact. And I know I'm blocked here. So, you know, I recognize that my perspective is limited more than it would be if I was like talking to somebody else. But I don't see any way that this part could let go
Mm-hmm.
unless something changed outside.
Could it be that that part would need to accept that the thing isn't going to change? That that's the
Yes,
part
I
that would
do.
need to. That's the part that would need to let go. When the question here is, what would that part need in order to let go? And you're saying that part needs the circumstance to change, but in order to let go without the circumstance in changing, that part needs to accept that the circumstance is allowed to
Isn't
be.
changing.
Not
I
even isn't
do.
changing, that it's allowed to be. Not I. And I want to stop you there because this I think is the part where we get really stuck because we identify with it. So when you slip into I, it can be so useful doing parts work when we say a part of me this and a part of
Yeah.
me that, rather than as soon as we say I, now we are that part.
Yeah, I'm enmeshed. I'm totally enmeshed with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally enmeshed with this part. Blended is the word, right? In IFS. And that's it. And I think that this is where it's nice. It's interesting being on a podcast where it's like, I don't have all this figured out. Like in the other podcast, I'm condemned. I can tell you and I can walk you through it and I can give you the insights, you know, and the thoughts. But on this, I am stuck. I am blended. I don't know. I can't even see my blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm aware of that. but it's something I've been working on for a long time, and I haven't made this is a place where I haven't made a lot of headway. So there's this part of me that's like, is this something I need to accept from the viewpoint of I might always struggle here. And not just that I might always struggle with the issue, but that I might always struggle with the relationship to the issue. You know what I
Right.
mean? And that might be this might be one of those things I don't fix. That I
Yes.
don't even fix, that I don't unblend with even.
Well, I think the acceptance part is accepting that that's where you are now
Mm.
and the unknown of whether it's possible, whether it's not. So there might be parts of myself that are still there that I would prefer not to be. And I accept that they're there. And that's just kind of how it is. These parts come and go. And I'm open to that changing, but needing to accept that. It sounds like this one is getting in your way.
It is getting in my way. It has to do with parenting, and I can't get around it. I can't I can't get around it. It's just showing up a lot. That's why I was up at 2 a.m.
Could you give your kids away? Would that solve the problem?
Yeah. No, it's because I feel so guilty too. And this is the other thing that ends up coming on top of it is that it
Sorry,
makes
can
me
I
feel
just say, I
bad.
like the way you answered that. It was almost like you'd already thought of that, but you're like, no.
Did I? Didn't
You
even
were
pick
like,
up
that
on
would make me feel. It just sounded like you're like, yeah, well, obviously I know I could do that, but that would make me feel guilty as well.
Tried it, didn't work. But
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
it's sad. And and that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Um And then it's like, I don't know. It's like there's no processing through that. It's just a sad thing.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been more helpful if I probably gave the actual context, but now we're here, so let's move along.
But I
And the
think
note to self.
go on, note to self.
And just note to self, maybe we give actual context because it maybe make it more understanding what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Put it in context is always helpful.
Otherwise, it's a bit cryptic. But it's a lot more vulnerable to do that when we're talking about
I
stuff
know.
that's very live for us at the moment as well. I can remember my mum saying, I still love you, but I don't like you very much right now. And that's the difference. There's a difference between like and love, no?
Yeah. But it's really
Intense.
yeah, it's just more than a I don't like you, right? Like I feel that way sometimes when my kids get like fight with each other and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I don't like you right now." But this is it's deeper. It's mine. It's completely mine. And it's tapping into a wound. And I haven't I haven't healed that wound. And I don't know that I ever will. And that's where I also sit right now where I feel like I think this wound is just here and it would take me 60 years, which I don't have, like to fix. And I certainly don't have that in my parenting time. So this is going to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm tempted to ask more questions, but I also think that maybe it's not helpful for you or even
well for the listener. I think maybe branching into a different part of the questions.
Well, when we're thinking about the classic things that people don't like each other, that was a slip, that people don't like about themselves. So some of the things that are coming up for me are things like how much time someone spends on their phone. They're frustrated with that. Getting themselves to bed. That's one that comes up a lot as well. The way that they eat. I'm trying to think of all the main things that tend to come up a lot that people say, I want to change this about myself. Can you think of any others?
Being more organized, being more fiscally responsible, not ordering so many packages on Amazon, cleaning up.
Relationship dynamics, getting into similar kinds of relationships over and over again. All these things I think are very human. Well, identity's got to come into this. Like how often does the things that we don't like about ourselves, we use the thing that we don't like to determine how we feel about ourselves in any given moment? I'm almost hearing that a bit and, don't want to dive into what you were saying, but what you were saying before, like there's something about this to your identity that you're like, it feels enmeshed with my identity and I can't completely separate myself from it because it is such a deep, like relational trauma.
Yeah. Let me ask this. So in your example of consistency, you turned that around, right? And do you consider yourself a consistent person right now, or just somebody who can be consistent, who has a vulnerability to being inconsistent?
Yes, I believe I'm capable of consistency, but it takes me to actually really think about how to make that easier for myself. So I know, for example, if there are things that I need to get done, it's got to be the morning. If I tell myself I'm going to do something later, it's not going to happen. And this ties in with procrastination, this consistency thing, because the procrastination will push it back. Another thing that really helped me was accepting the fact that I'm a sprinter, not a marathon runner, which means I sprint and then I collapse. I sprint, I
Yeah.
collapse. I sprint, I collapse. Yes, I would love not to collapse, but my energy just doesn't come in consistent waves to be a marathoner. And maybe
Yeah.
I wouldn't even enjoy it as much anyway. Maybe there's something that's kind of energizing about the sprint when I'm in that.
Yes, I think this is the value of looking at our traits not as something to change, but something to work with and evolve, or putting a different spin on it. I think we have a lot of expectation about what we should be based on what society tells us we should be and how that looks a very specific way, a very mainstream way. And some of us are going to consistently run up against the fact that our personality just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this with introversion and extroversion. Can I challenge myself as an introvert to socialize more organically or to have more social interaction? Yes, but I cannot do it under the assumption that I should be an extrovert, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if we can give ourselves more room to be like, how do I become more of this trait or have more of this thing that I desire, still being who I am? I remember there was a coach one time who posted something about how she's like, I work hard and I play hard. She's like, I do these sprint kind of content creation and I launch these things and I do all these things. And then I just like burn out of it and I just take a few months off. And she was saying that like, yeah, that's the method. She wasn't saying like, don't go so hard because then you'll burn out, right? Which is the mainstream idea. Like, we've got to modulate. We can't expect ourselves to do all these things. And she was like, oh, no, that's how I am. And I'm going to continue to be like that. And that's how I'm going to work. And I remember just being like, yeah, that's so much more realistic and goes actually along with my energy, right? Like that's how I move. And then I don't have to change that. And I can just accept like, okay, how do I work with that and still get what I want? You know what I mean? Or still align with my values or become a hard worker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think there's something in here about predicting the future. So if we're coming to this question of how much can we change about ourselves, what is actually possible, and where do we need to be going? Actually, I just accept that this is a part of me and I need to figure out how to live with it. I feel like it's almost the other way around, accepting it's a part of you at this time, however live it is, and figuring out how to live with it. And then from that perspective, seeing what can shift, almost from the idea of it kind of needs to be okay to be there in order to be able to do some work on it,
Yeah,
to be able to soften it.
you're right. Yeah, it's like body image, right? It's all everything's connected. I do think there's another cohort of people here, maybe where we've internalized shoulds. I think there's something about accepting. That word is tricky, but did you just say accepting?
Yeah, or not even non-resistance.
Yeah, not resisting the part. On the other hand, I think sometimes we get caught in victimization. And I think that we can also take that in a different direction and be like, this is just who I am and nothing's going to change. And then we're sitting in our own disempowerment too, right? So I think there's a difference, and I'm trying to figure out what the nuance is between not resisting something versus hiding or not being accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And one will help evolve and one will keep us stuck. So there's a certain amount of challenging oneself that is sometimes applicable if that non-resistance is actually a mask for fear.
Mm-hmm. So here's an interesting example then of mine. So as you know, for as long as you've known me, I've been single. And in the last few years, I kind of dip a toe in the dating pool now and again. I go on a few dates and then I come back going like, I need a break from that for a bit. And I go on a break and then I go back out. And when I'm dating, I don't mind dating because I'm somebody, I like meeting people anyway. And I've been able to frame dates as I'm just going out and meeting a person. If we hit it off, great. Or as my friend once said, what was it she said? She goes, I basically go on a date thinking I'm just meeting someone. This is no big deal. Like, you know, this is probably not going to be anything. And at the same time, I'm planning our wedding.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't know why that always made me laugh. The juxtaposition of both happening. Anyway, I have recently come to the decision of I don't think I want a relationship. And that feels kind of freeing. On the other side, there is fear around being in a relationship. And I do have a bit of an avoidant process around certainly romantic relationships. So I'm kind of, when you ask that question, I'm like, is this then hiding? Because yes, there is some fear about the idea of pursuing a relationship and all of that. And on the flip side, The idea of not having a relationship previously, like a couple of years ago, I would have been, oh, that feels really sad. Like the idea of not having a relationship ever just feels really sad. And now it doesn't. But that's not because I've worked through my fear around it.
Mm-mm.
But at the same time, it feels really liberating. And so I have thought about this and I've kind of landed with, well, do you know what? If there is a part of me that's going, I'm avoiding this and I'm not working through something, but this really does feel okay, then I'm
Yeah.
kind of just, that's where I
Yeah.
am right now. I'm okay with that.
There must be something here I haven't landed on. What you're describing doesn't feel like the victim. There's a victimization element, I think, that you're not in. That changes it.
I don't think I'm being entirely honest because when you say that, I'm like, there is a part of me that's like, there could be nobody out there that's a good fit for me.
Yeah.
Well, that feels a bit, I mean, there's
Uh,
however many billion people on the planet. And I'm like, yes, but there's no one for me out there.
I don't mean victimization like that. I mean victimization like I'm just going to accept that there is no relationship for me because I just need to accept that. Almost like you're doing it to show the world that you accept it. You know what I mean? Like that kind of that kind of energy. As opposed to your own, it sounds more grounded what you're saying. And I'm reading a lot into tone, but yeah, you look like you have something to say.
Well, because you're saying that, and I think that there is a little part of me that does, there is a little bit of
Yeah.
that. And then when you're like, your tone sounds so grounded, I'm like, yes, that's because I'm showing the world, I'm showing the world through
Ah,
this decision. And yet, and yet, previously I was always in this kind of position where I'm like, I'm not desperate for a relationship now, but the idea of never having a relationship for the rest of my life didn't feel okay. Now, when I sit here and I look at the rest of my life and I think, actually, if I don't have a relationship for the rest of my life, okay. And
yeah.
it does that does feel different. But that isn't I don't think I've worked through fear. I think I've just really accepted it. And okay, I might have accepted it from a grounded place, but that also has the double advantage of allowing me not to confront the fear too.
Yeah.
Because there's a part of me that goes, I don't want to deal with anybody else's dark corners.
Mm. Maybe I misrepresented it. I don't think we need to be absent of fear. It's just, is fear ruling it? Is it the leading part?
So if there was no fear, let me try and do a little thought experiment as best as I can, hypothetically. If there was no fear at all about getting in a relationship, there's still part of me's going, yeah, I wouldn't pursue it. I don't care enough. There's always been a kind of ambivalence. I say always, for a long time around relationships, there's been a kind of ambivalence, which isn't the same as not caring. It's kind of sometimes a bit like this, sometimes a bit like that, this moving back and forth. It's never felt this sort of determined, this is what I want. I want to go out there. I want to see if there's, somebody who would be a good partner for me. That's not, I haven't felt that. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that's also been part of the block on the times where I've half heartedly gone out there and had a few dates.
What part of you are we talking about changing, though, here?
Well, I'm not.
Right.
But it was when you were talking about the idea of um, the disempowerment of kind of going, okay, the fear, I'm not confronting the fear and I'm just going into acceptance because I don't want to move through the fear. I don't want to move the fear through the fear, but that's also because I believe that the thing on the other side of the fear, I doubt that it's worth it.
I think that's it. I think there's something about the disempowerment being where we're in a victimized place or a fearful place and keep running into ourselves. If you're not running into yourself and you're like, I can actually let this go, I can move forward in my life and not be like ruminating and keep coming back to this conversation in my head and keep coming back to the idea that I'm not in a relationship and there's something about when we're attached to it and still being like, but I'm not resisting it. There's some call there to like where change needs to take place.
Yes. Yes.
This topic was so interesting when you introduced it. But yesterday I was at my daughter's lacrosse game, which is also the impetus for this whole story I got. But this is a side story. And somebody sitting behind me said, "Oh, Stefanie, I'm watching this show." And the main character, she's like, I don't know the actress's name, but she's like, every time I see her, and I said to my husband, I was like, that's Stefanie. And of course, then when somebody says that to you, you're like, oh goodness, like that's really confronting. Like who reminds you of me? That's
Mm-hmm.
going to tell me a lot of things. And I was like, oh, don't even tell me. Like, don't even tell me. And the woman sitting next to her was like, oh yeah, like I can see it. And of course, then they're like, let me find, and they're looking up the name, and I'm like, oh no, this could go really badly. And she ends up bringing, she's like, and I honestly can't remember the actress's name, but she was in Downton Abbey. And she's like, this one. And it wasn't like a looks thing. It was this person is meek and soft spoken and seems a little to me like dainty and passive. And that's the character she played in Downton Abbey, I think. I mean, I could be biased here. I can't remember. But why am I seen as meek? And this is what I have been rallying against my whole life. And to the point where I've spoken to you about this, I've overcorrected to become almost too abrasive and like taking up too much space. But yet, this woman basically, I felt like called me meek. And I was like, you really don't ever change. Like, there is something about you. And this brought up this conflict inside of me of, is it true that I will always be meek and that people will always see me as that no matter how much I correct it? Or that there's some part of me that still reads as that. Now, of course, I'm doing a lot of projection here and a lot of storytelling. But it was an interesting thing to think about how much I feel like I've changed from that character, but clearly not. You know what I mean? Like, and it made me think about, are we just who we are and we can act differently?
I think people have a really hard time updating their stories about you, especially people you have known for a
I
number
didn't
of
know
years.
her for a long time. This is a new person.
Well, then she doesn't know. She just doesn't know. Like, then we can just discount her. She doesn't even know you. She doesn't even know. If you can't say that this is somebody who you feel like really knows you, then
She doesn't, but it goes to the fact of like, this is still how I'm presenting.
But I think this is one of the reasons why it's hardest to change with family and those
Yeah.
closest to us, because you can start doing new behaviors, putting in boundaries, doing things differently, whatever it might be. And that old story that they have of you that can go back to being a kid. The
Yes.
story that my dad has of my brother is
Yeah.
really my brother when he
Same.
was like 12. He just
Yeah.
doesn't see my brother as like a pretty career successful guy.
Yes.
And it's interesting to listen to him because when he's talking about him, I'm thinking, wow, you really haven't updated
Yes.
your story about your son. And kind of like vice versa as well between me and dad, because I struggle to be who I feel more like I am around my dad.
Yeah. Oh,
Because
like you fall into your old roles.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Old roles, even how I feel, even like the mode I'm in. It's
Yeah.
a challenge to be the updated 42-year-old
Yes.
Sarah of today. But I don't know. I'm intrigued with that person that you say. When you meet somebody, like you say, you don't know her that well, then maybe you are going to come across as
I know. It betrays me because I thought I was hiding it really well. I thought that I was just coming across as really mysterious and grounded. I'm just coming across as meek.
do you not think as well it's a bit relative because with all due respect, American versions of Meek and British versions of Meek might be on a different level
Well,
because
I have no, it's relative though.
that's what I
It's still
mean.
relative.
Hmm.
But it's also true that I do present a different way when I'm nervous socially than I do when I'm comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is true. So maybe I'm just mad about it. Maybe I'm just like, what? Like, why can't I be just one consistent self?
A good friend, well, a friend of mine that I haven't spoken to for a long time sent me a message and said that there's some policewoman character in some program on the BBC called Paradise something. And she says, oh my goodness, it's you. And it just reminded me, I keep meaning to check that one out to
Uh,
see what it
oh,
is
you.
that, yeah, me, not you. She doesn't know you. Well, she
No, no,
might
I
do.
meant of her. But you know what? It makes me think about, okay, maybe part of the resistance is about understanding I have multiple parts. And this also goes in, like, 'cause I think that what you're naming about families is going to be really, really relevant to a lot of people. And I feel that as well. And the anger I sometimes have around being still assigned the role of my 13-year-old self. Like, how long do I have to live to prove that I'm not my 13-year-old self? And then it's like, okay, first of all, I think we become symbols for people. And we also do that. I do that to my dad too. Like, I don't let him evolve, maybe, even though he doesn't. But like, like I would let him if he did. You know what I mean? Because it's like I need him to be what he is for my stories to continue. I also like to think that I would be able to recognize that. But I also think sometimes maybe it's that we are going to be symbols to some people. We will be seen in a certain light by some people. Also, everything is subjective. If someone sees you a certain way, they will interpret all of your behaviors through that lens. And to somebody else who's seeing you a different way, the same behaviors are going to be interpreted differently. And so, I'll say, can I make peace with being different things to different people? And the bigger thing, to being misunderstood. And I think that's an episode topic. I think that's a really hard one. I cannot tolerate being misunderstood, but
Let's do it next
I have
week.
to.
Tune in next week for being misunderstood. We'll talk about it
Okay.
next.
That was a Halloween costume I wore once.
What was?
I was in a wedding with my friend, and all the bridesmaids, we were like, this was such an expensive dress. We need to get more use out of it. So we all on Halloween put the bridesmaids' dresses on and made sashes. Mischievous, misunderstood, misrepresented, or miss whatever, like
Calculated.
right. And I was misunderstood. I was like, I want that one.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It's so funny though, isn't it? How it means different things to different people. Because if somebody were to see me now as I might have been more viewed as my 13, 14-year-old self, they would probably think I was very opinionated. They would probably think I was full of it. So if someone called me meek or likened me to being meek and softer, I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll take that.
Like the grass is greener.
Yeah, exactly. I'd rather that somebody thought I was that.
Yeah, that's so funny.
How,
Yeah.
can I ask, how would you like to be seen?
I would like to be seen as strong,
Mhm.
um, grounded, but energized, intelligent, perceptive.
Yes.
Um,
I see you as perceptive. I think you are perceptive.
okay.
Yeah, I think you're very perceptive. I think that's one of your strengths.
Yeah.
I think
It's interesting to ask somebody what they want to be seen as. I think it's a great question because it shows what your values are.
Mhm.
And also I think it highlights when you have a discussion about it. So I want to ask you the same question. It really helps to see somebody else have different values, because I know we know this cognitively, but sometimes it's like, oh, we don't all value the same thing. And so the very same things that we're trying to hide about ourselves or trying to fix about ourselves to another person could be admirable. What do you want to be seen as?
Kind, knowledgeable, self-aware. That's a big one. I want people to think I'm self-aware. Um, what are you laughing
I
at?
just think it's nothing. It's just the language of like, I want people to think I'm self-aware.
I
Like
want to
it's
be
different than I want to
self-aware.
be self-aware.
No, I really, really do strive to be self-aware.
Yeah, I know.
Like I really mean that in a uh, on all levels. I want to see myself as self-aware as well. But I also know that the minute I start saying, "Oh, I'm so self-aware," I like you lose some
Right,
self-awareness
exactly. It's
just
a
in
meta
that very
thing.
statement. So that's why I can't see myself as too self-aware. It's always going to be a work in progress. How else do I want to be seen? I want to be seen as warm and approachable and friendly. And sometimes I feel like in situations where I don't feel quite comfortable, I'm not able to embody that. I think there are times when I am those things. And also there's a lot of occasions when I want to be warmer, more approachable. I want to be more like initiating at times because
Hmm.
I think there are, I don't know, moments or conversations or places that I've been where I've missed out on opportunities to connect to people because of my own self-consciousness. So our
Yeah.
podcast events are a classic example. I know we've spoken about this afterwards as well. I want to feel like I can really connect and see the people, but often my head is so full of what we're doing next at the podcast thing or thinking about the food or there's all the different strands of the organization of the event that really blocks my capacity to be present. And
Mm.
I would love to be really, really present. Um,
Does it bother you enough in the moments when you're not that, like I'm thinking about, okay, well, if we're talking about changing things, can we change? And you're saying this is something I'd like to be that I don't feel like I always am. Does it bother you enough? Or do you think if you if this was like a full-time job for you to be working on, you could change it?
that's a good question. Um, I think it maybe involves acknowledging and being willing to lean into the discomfort around that because it's not massive fear, as in it's not unmanageable fear, but it's like there's enough awkwardness and fear to worry about saying the wrong thing. And that was a big thing as well. I can remember as a teenager, I was in a particular youth group with people a lot older than me. I had other groups where I felt very comfortable and very in it. And then there was this particular group, everyone was older than me, so I saw them as being like a lot cooler. And I can remember being with them in a group and the amount of times that I was just silent. I didn't say anything. And I can remember one time, me and this other girl, Chrissy, we went round one of their houses, and it was mostly guys as well. For some reason, there was like 8 guys and like 3 girls or something like that. And we went around one of their houses, and I arrived with my friend Chrissy, and we sat down. And then at some point, maybe 10, 15 minutes later, Chrissy went, "Oh my goodness, I've got an ant crawling on me," or something like that. And the whole room burst into laughter. And they were started counting on their fingers. And basically, they'd all been talking about when me and Chrissy arrived, they reckoned that we wouldn't say more than 7 words between us or something like that.
Hmm.
And I remember the shame
Yeah.
that I felt of that everyone's talking about
Yeah.
how, like, oh, you don't. I felt like, I felt so, what's the word? I can feel it in my body. I
can
can feel
see it.
myself getting hot as I'm talking about it. I felt so like unwanted, I think. I felt like I'd inserted myself into this group. I wasn't bringing anything to the table. It would make no difference if I was there or I wasn't there. And that had been so noticed. It wasn't like I'd been completely in the background. It'd been noticed and everyone had been talking about it. Oh, yeah, the shame of that. I can remember. Really.
It's interesting that somebody would say out loud to you.
These are teenagers. Teenagers
Oh, yeah.
don't give a crap what they say. And also they just thought it was funny. They didn't think they were being horrible,
Right.
you know?
Like it's not as much to them as it was to you. Like
Yes, yes.
the judgment wasn't braided into it the way it landed on you.
Yeah.
But I think this question of changing ourselves, if I sat here and was like, here's all the things I'd like to be better at, here's all the things I'd like to be seen for, I would be spending, again, like I said, a full-time job. I don't have time to work
Mhm.
on all of these things in the way that I think it takes to actually. So I think we end up where we put our attention ends up being in the places where we need to and where we're consistently running up against something. But also that means that there's going to be things that we're not changing about ourselves, even if we can recognize that we'd like to.
Mhm.
And give ourselves a little bit of a break. I mean, like, how much work can we do in a lifetime? You know what I mean? And how many things can we change? But the things that matter to us the most, the things that are standing out to us as, I think my quality of life would improve here, or I would think I would suffer a lot less if, this thing just keeps coming back. At one time in my life, that was meekness, and it was enough of an issue that I did work to that. But other things I'll probably never change, which is a shame. But next life.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think it's accepting the shadow side. So, okay, yes, I said kind. I also need to recognize there's a part of me that's not kind and that there always will be, probably. And there's something actually accepting the not kind part is quite a kind thing to do. Look at me winning the kindness game.
Look, you found a way.
Well, as usual, we don't have any takeaways for you. We will.
What do you mean usual? There is no usual anymore.
I mean, there's no usual anymore.
Well, it's only episode 3, so
Oh, that's a good point.
people can take away their own takeaways.
I would like to be seen as the kind of podcast that gave people something to take away. Not in a tips kind of way, but
Final thoughts kind of way.
yeah, or something like that. Or, maybe it's one of those things that we just need to accept about ourselves.
That's what I was thinking.
But yeah. Anyway.
I actually have the inclination to be like, I have one last thought, what we didn't even get to that I'm just going to introduce right now at the end.
We could do
You
that.
take it away and see what you can make of it. I won't do that.
Why not?
I don't know. That might feel a little funny for people, but I'll give it to you since I talked about it. I think that the things we want to change about ourselves are the things that we have the most vulnerability for, and the things that we don't end up tending to are the things we don't feel insecure about. For example, I wouldn't value like changing my level of kindness because I never had insecurity about being kind as a kid because it went really nicely with being meek. But even though now my kindness could probably stand an upgrade, I don't have an insecurity about it because I didn't as a kid.
Yeah.
And it wasn't one of those things I learned to be insecure about.
Yeah.
Even though maybe I should be. But yeah, it's interesting. I think the things we want to change about ourselves are the things we have stories about.
I love the way you said that so fast because you were trying to get it in at the end and try not to take up too much time. But I'm going to just jump off with one last thing on that. That sometimes the things we want to change, what we might need to change, is what we make it mean about ourselves. So I might say, I don't want to procrastinate anymore. But actually, what I've needed to do is challenge what I was making it mean that I procrastinated. I thought that meant I was lazy. I thought it meant I was undisciplined, all of these things. And I'm just much, again, kinder to myself about it, which has enormously helped, as in like the amount of people that procrastinate. It's just a very human trait, and I just felt like I was the only one who did it as badly as I did it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Thank you
right.
all.
Join us next week for being misunderstood.
I'll bring my sash.